Today on CityCast Las Vegas, we talk with Ariel Chenard of the Nevada Heat Lab at the Desert Research Institute. She's tasked with reimagining how our city deals with the threat of heat and explains why we're just not very good at talking about it. It's Tuesday, August 26th. I'm David Figler, and here's what Las Vegas is talking about. Ariel, do you think that Las Vegas has generally buried its head in the sand over our increasingly dangerous summer temperatures?
No, actually,
Oh,
from
good.
my perspective, this is the work that I do, right? So, from my perspective, I've seen a lot change just in the time that I've worked in this role as the lead for the Nevada Heat Lab here at DRI. Previous to that, I worked with Clark County as their urban heat fellow, and I've seen this conversation changing now for about 5 years.
Hmm.
And maybe 3, 4, 5 years. And I think, you know, compared to some other places that experience extreme temperatures like us, we haven't done as much work as they have. We've gotten a little bit of a later start. But our RTC back in, 2021, 2022, those COVID years are kind of blurry. They
Yeah,
came
for
out with
everybody.
oh, yeah, absolutely. They came out with an extreme heat vulnerability assessment that took a look at the metro area and used probably, I don't know, what was it, 12 to 14 different variables to take a look at where in the city, like geographically, people were most exposed to extreme heat, and then looked at factors that can make people more vulnerable to extreme heat, whether that's chronic conditions, age, all sorts of different factors. And I
Hmm.
think that really started changing the conversation around heat. And you will still run into folks that, kind of have this attitude of like, well, duh, it's a desert. Of course it's hot, as if that doesn't have a huge impact on people's day to day lives. So I am seeing the conversation change and move forward in some really important ways.
Why is heat mitigation, addressing it, even talking about it to the level that we probably need to because of the dangers, so hard?
Oh, I think it's hard for a lot of different reasons, but we've got to recognize that heat is the deadliest natural hazard, right?
Mm.
It's the deadliest hazard here in Southern Nevada. It's the deadliest hazard in our state. It's the deadliest hazard in the US and across the world. Heat takes more lives than any other natural hazard out there. That's hurricanes, tornadoes, you name it. Heat kills more people.
I mean,
Um,
do they just have better publicists, Ariel? Because it's like we hear about all these natural disasters, but nobody talks about the giant heat wave that killed so many people, et cetera, et cetera.
I think in some ways, um, heat exists on a different kind of temporal level. Okay,
Mm.
if you can kind of get to that place where heat waves, um, they can last a while, right? You can have 10 days, with temps well above normal. But these other natural hazards, like a hurricane or a flash flood, like they're very, acute. They are a specific moment in time.
Mm.
And let's face it, they come with more striking visuals, right?
Yeah.
It is really hard to communicate visually the impact of heat. So in a way, yes, David, they do have better publicists,
You
you
know, you
know?
just made me think of like a lobster being struck by lightning and everyone freaking out, but a lobster slow boiling in a in a pot of water, a little less graphically interesting. Is there anything about our heat in particular, our part of the Mojave Desert that's uniquely challenging or tricky?
Well, it gets incredibly hot here, and that
Mm.
is a feature of a lot of the desert Southwest. Um, Vegas is interesting. Southern Nevada is really interesting because we do have such an extreme climate, right? We get about 4 inches of rain per year. I think we're the
Mm.
driest city, I believe, in the US. You can fact check me on that.
We,
Um,
we got to be close,
we got to be
right?
close, if
Yeah.
not number one. Um, And, in the summer, we have really extremely high temperatures. In the winter, we can get hard freezes. So this is a lot of climate, we just
Mm-hmm.
get to straddle a lot of extremes here. And I think that makes it pretty unique. And I think one of the challenges too is that, we have one of the worst urban heat island effects in the nation. And are you familiar with the urban heat island effect?
I live with one of the people who was involved in that study from the Regional Transportation Commission. So yeah, I've gotten an earful about it, of
Yes,
course.
of course you have. But other folks might not know that the urban
Yeah.
heat island effect is a result of our built environment. So
Hmm.
here in Las Vegas, our hottest neighborhoods, so our UHI neighborhoods, are 11 degrees hotter than our coolest neighborhoods. And we do
Wow.
have neighborhoods that, if the official temperature at Harry Reid is 120, we have neighborhoods that might be 116, 117. That's partly due to changes in elevation across the valley. So the west
Right.
side of the valley is a little bit higher than the east side, and that can
Yes.
knock a few degrees off your temperature. But imagine what that 11-degree difference means when the temperature is 120. I mean,
Mm.
that's a bonkers level of hot, right?
Yeah.
And that too makes this a really unique space in which to talk about heat.
All right. So tell me what you're up to over at the Nevada Heat Lab.
Sure. So our project is now in its third summer. So we are still a relatively new project. And originally, our project was very focused on Southern Nevada because heat obviously has a huge impact on Southern Nevada. But, as we learn more and make more connections, we are absolutely realizing that this is a statewide issue, which is not surprising.
Hmm.
Um, but it grew out of a gap. And that gap was that there was nobody owned heat. Okay. So there are tons of people across Southern Nevada, across the state, who work on heat in one way or another, but there was no central sort of gathering place or collaborating or convening space for all these different folks. And our project was designed primarily to provide that collaborating and convening space. So I started the Heat Working Group back in, what was it, 2023, with 8 people. And it has grown now to over 100 folks across Nevada and Southern Nevada who work on heat in some way or another. And that's everything from, folks at the health district, to emergency management, to community based organizations, to local governments. I mean, it is an incredible group of folks. When you start talking about extreme heat, you end up talking about, well, you sometimes talk about wildfire smoke exposure. You talk about drought. You talk about access to affordable housing. You talk about folks who are dependent on public transportation. You talk about senior citizens. You talk about food security or insecurity. Like, you end up talking about so much. And that's because heat has such a huge impact on people's day to day lives here.
Woven Workspaces is Las Vegas's newest premier flexible office space, located in the heart of downtown Las Vegas. Featuring premium co-working spaces, private offices, and a gorgeous shared kitchen with complimentary beverages and snacks. Woven just hosted our team for a work in person day, and I was relieved to see that they stocked La Croix because I drink at least 6 of those bad boys every day while I make this podcast. Not to mention, Woven is in the same building as Broken Yolk and Baguette Cafe, so I stopped by and got a croissant on my way upstairs. Whether you're a business owner looking for a new office space or you work remote and you just need some human connection, Woven is a workspace designed to inspire and connect. CityCast listeners get their first day of co-working for free and get access to exclusive memberships and private office offers. To get your pass and learn more, call Rebecca with Woven at 415-407-6355 and check out wovenworkspaces.com for more information.
There are a lot of vulnerable people in our community. And last summer alone, we lost like an outrageous amount of people. 524 people were
27.
lost.
527.
Were lost to the heat. I guess I need to first ask, given what we know now, or even what you've been studying for years, were those losses of life preventable?
That's a tough question because, I kind of see this almost as like harm reduction work because
Hmm.
you can't, people will still make their own choices, right? But a lot of heat deaths are absolutely preventable, whether that's through better heat health messaging so that people understand that heat can kill you, or, leave you with really terrible outcomes, medical outcomes. Is it better resourcing people who are making really tough trade-offs? Like we know, because we are researchers and our primary, objective is to provide not only the heat working group but other decision makers with high quality research and information around heat. Like we know that people make really difficult trade-offs when it's hot, right? They
Hmm.
choose between keeping their homes at a safe and livable temperature or putting food on the table or
Yeah.
affording their medications or going to doctor's appointments or getting their kids to daycare or whatever it is, because heat exposure um, can be so overwhelming for folks, right? And
Yeah.
those trade-offs are very serious.
So is the climate changing? Because you do hear, like, especially old timey Las Vegans like myself, although I'm not the one who says it, but I've heard other of my peers say it's always been extreme heat. We live in the friggin' desert. There's nothing different now than before, except and then some people try to make it into a cultural war thing about calling stuff extreme heat. You've heard that before?
Sure. I mean, I guess I'd say to those naysayers, for them, heat is an inconvenience. For other people, it is a matter of life and death. Just look at summer 2024. That was incredibly hot. And it just didn't stop being hot, like well into October. The kind of heat that we experienced last year is the sort of heat we're looking at having on a regular basis, 10, 15 years down the road.
Hmm.
Climate change is real. It is impacting the Southwest. And I feel like it's almost an evergreen headline, 2024, the hottest year, hottest summer on record. And I also need to recognize though that even within that trend of ever warming summers, there are outlier years possible. Like summer 2024 was exceptionally hot. This year has not been like
By
2024.
comparison, no, we
Thank
seem to
God.
be an Arctic
Yeah,
temperature by
right.
comparison,
So
but
I
not
think
really.
I right.
Yeah.
I think people lose track of the fact that like yeah, every summer is a little bit different, but the overall trend is hotter and hotter. And it's a tough thing to think about when you think about the kind of summer that we have had last year and experiencing that on a regular basis and thinking about that loss of life and thinking about the impacts on our communities.
Yeah. Have you been able to pinpoint if there's specific groups that are indeed more vulnerable once you look at all the data, or is it pretty much across the board?
Well, listen, at a certain point, everybody is heat vulnerable, right?
Mm.
Like we start to get to that place around 115. We were certainly there when we reached 120. That heat is dangerous to anyone, right? Although last summer it was 118 degrees and my husband went golfing. So it's like there's definitely a disconnect between who identifies as being vulnerable when it's really hot and who doesn't, and how do we change language, how do we message things differently so folks say, hey, this is me too. But to answer your question, yes, there are certain parts of the population that are simply more vulnerable. Senior citizens are more vulnerable to heat. Small kids who can't necessarily articulate well how they're feeling or are dependent on others for care. People who are dependent on public transportation, our unhoused population, absolutely, just because the degree of exposure, people with chronic conditions. The takeaway message is that sooner or later, it's all of us, right?
Mm. Hmm. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit, and I want to talk about trees because that does come up in this conversation, especially on this podcast. We have talked about trees being a great solution for urban heat islands. But I did see that and I'm not a scientist, so I'm going to ask you some recent research that I think came out of DRI that says, hold up, not so fast. Can you explain where trees fit into this big equation?
It's a nuanced answer.
Hmm.
I think that, oh gosh, there's a couple points I want to make here. One is that Las Vegas is a really hard place to be a tree. This is not a naturally forested environment. You need to get up into the
Right.
mountains before you start seeing big trees. When you go out into the desert, maybe you see a shrubby looking mesquite or two, but like this is not a naturally forested area. So when we plant trees, we're actually doing something called afforestation, right? And the research, I worked with two incredible scientists, John Mejia and Juan Hinano, on a modeling exercise that took a look at expanding urban tree canopy to see if it would cool the city. And what that modeling exercise found, and we're going to, there are so many more questions to ask in that space. But we found that like trees are not going to drop the air temperature of Las Vegas.
Mm.
And and then everybody threw up their hands and they said, oh no, this one weird trick to fix urban heat, it's not going to work. And I just think like you've got to think about what scale trees can operate on, right? We're asking a lot of native and desert adapted trees when we're like, can you cool down this entire city? And finding out that no, that might not be an outcome. But you know what trees can do? Trees can cool people
Mm.
and they can help shade buildings. And there are so many other incredible benefits of trees. So everybody kind of has this really emotional reaction to hearing like, oh, trees aren't going to do the thing that everybody wanted trees to do here. And there are
Yeah.
still so many more questions to ask about that. Like that's not necessarily set in stone. But what trees can do is reduce the amount of like sun and heat that you're experiencing just from like walking down a sidewalk, right? Think
Yeah.
about it intuitively. It's a really hot day. Where are you going to stand? Are you going to stand in the shade? Yes, you are. Or are you going to stand out in the blazing sun? No. And so there are ways in which trees can make our urban heat island neighborhoods more walkable, more livable, more comfortable on the pedestrian and human level. And that is really, really important because it's people and our built structures and all these other things that need cooling too, that need the relief that trees bring.
Got it. So the Lorax says, look, I'm doing the best I can, but I'm not going to solve all your problems. So, Ariel, what can we do that we haven't tried yet?
I think there are a number of things that we can do and that our heat working group is working towards. And one of them is to take a look at some other places. We look at Phoenix a lot
Hmm.
because they have a somewhat similar climate, although they get double the amount of rain that we do, and also experience really extreme temperatures. And some of the things that they do is they have a very expanded network of cooling resources. So that would be cooling stations, hydration stations. They have cooling centers that operate 24/7. And so, kind of taking a look at other places across the nation, like what are the best practices? What could that look like here?
Hmm.
Um, and so our heat working group is working on supporting expanded hours at certain cooling station locations, looking at the feasibility of like what it would mean to have to shelter people when it gets really hot, just having some new conversations
Mm.
about other types of resources that could be offered to the community going forward. And I do think that the experience of 2024 that summer really helped people to realize like, oh, this is really important and this is now. And, you know, other places are prepared in ways that we haven't been. Right now, our only response to extreme heat here in Southern Nevada is the cooling station response.
Hmm.
And that's activated through Clark County Social Services. So anytime the National Weather Service issues an extreme heat warning, our cooling stations activate. And this year, there's expanded signage so that folks can identify their nearby cooling station locations. There's bottled water delivered to every location, and more conversations around like, how do we make this more robust, right?
Yeah. But that's kind of like, a reactive thing. Is there more that we can do that we haven't been doing that is more preventative or mitigating before we get to the point where, we better make sure that people are getting water or their shelter? I mean, those are obviously important things. I don't mean to diminish it in any way, but is there anything else we should be doing that other cities are doing on maybe a bigger scale or a more systemic impact scale?
Well, when it comes to mitigation, there's definitely a conversation around shade disparity. So we were talking about what trees can and can't do, but we also can recognize that trees are a grown form of shade. Like, you can plant a tree, please plant trees. Great. It's a hope for the future, but those trees are going to take time. We can also build shade. So how are we looking at where in our communities we need, we have the hottest temperatures in our UHI neighborhoods. How do we get more shade into those places? RTC is working on new shaded bus stops, all these different pieces that can come together. But that response piece is really important too, because heat is an emergency, right? And heat is absolutely deadly for our community. So that response piece also needs to grow alongside that mitigation piece. But also looking at other ways in which we can work with our built environment to make homes more energy efficient, to get shade over homes, to reduce the amount of impervious surfaces. So like blacktop, pavement, all those things that kind of suck in heat during the day and push it back out at night. So it's a very wide ranging conversation around, how do we mitigate and prepare and respond to, a pretty regular threat.
I did get a press release recently from Senator Jackie Rosen, who's been a frequent guest on this podcast, something called the Extreme Heat Emergency Act. I know you don't comment on policy, but, are measures like this in general valuable? And have you taken a look at anything in that particular bill that, you would want to lend some information about?
So I can provide a little context on that, right? One of the challenges in both mitigating and responding to heat is that heat is not recognized by the Stafford Act.
That's the Emergency Federal Disaster Response Act. You get federal funds when there are those big ones, the hurricanes and the flash floods and the tornadoes. Yeah.
Right. So the Stafford Act tended to really pick those types of natural hazards and disasters that are very acute in time. The example of a flash flood, I know that's been in the news, or a catastrophic wildfire or a hurricane, or some of those things that are a little bit different from heat in that way. But heat is an emergency. And the challenge, we know it's an emergency. 527 people lost their lives. How is that not an emergency, right? So one of the challenges in both heat response and mitigation is, how do you do emergency-ish things when it's not technically an emergency? And we know that summers are trending hotter. I feel like we kind of got a little lucky this summer. Other parts of our nation have been absolutely baking, So recognizing heat as the emergency it is would allow communities to better prepare, respond, mitigate, all of those things we think about when it comes to like flooding and hurricanes and fires. Heat, it's not getting any cooler. Let's put it that way.
Ariel, I really appreciate you coming on CityCast Las Vegas to talk about the topic that we should all be talking about a lot more. So thank you so much.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
And that's all for today here on CityCast Las Vegas. If you enjoyed the show, hey, go tell a friend. You could also rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our morning newsletter. We will be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Till then, stay lucky.